All right, guys, welcome to today's class. We're going to continue where we left off on this last lesson and start a new lesson. So let's get started. Example 20. The difference between two prime numbers is 101. What is the value of the larger prime number? Well, all right, how do we approach this? Well, since the difference between two prime numbers is 101, I think we've done this before. But a small refresh is an odd and even. If we do any odd plus even, odd minus even. If you do any of these two, it's always going to end up as an odd. Alright? That's a small rephrase. Since we did this problem before, I'll just show you this formula, and then it helps you just derive this answer. Since we want an only odd and an even. Since the only even prime is 2, which means that the other prime number should be 103, and that is indeed a prime number. Since 103 minus 2 is equal to 101, the answer is just B. Alright? Two prime numbers P and Q satisfy the following conditions. P equals M plus N and Q equals Mn, where both M and N are positive integers. Find the value of P to the Q plus Q to the P. Pretty sure we also did this question before in last couple lessons before. But let's continue this. Well, P is equal to M plus N, and P has to be a prime number. And Q equals M times N, where Q is also a prime number. This means that M and N, one of them must be 1. Why? Since they're prime. Make sure to read the question. It says prime. Since these are prime, that means, let's say, N is 1. Then we have M is equal to P. And then M plus N is just M plus 1, which is just P. I mean, this is Q. My bad. M is equal to Q. So there's just one more. And there's only one pair of prime numbers, so that they're a distance of 1 apart, which is only Q equals 2, P equals 3. Alright? So then this just simplifies down to 2 to the 3 plus 3 squared, or 13 as our final answer, or B. Alright? Now let's move on to example 22. If A plus B plus C is equal to 68, and AB plus BC plus CA is equal to 1121, where A, B, C, and C are all prime numbers, find the value of ABC. Well, we also did this question, I think, pretty sure in last class. So I'll just skip this for now, alright? But the whole idea is just to use the parity, odd and even, to rule out all the prime numbers. For example, A plus B plus C is equal to 68. It only can be 3 even or 2 odd, 1 even. If there's only one even prime number, which is 2, 2 plus 2 plus 2 is just 6, and 6 is obviously less than 68, so only one of them must be 2. So B and C are going to be odd. Alright? And then doing all the calculations in casework, you'll just end up with B or 1978 if I'm correct. Alright? Now let's move on to example 23. For how many positive integers A is A squared minus 3A plus 2 a prime number? Let's guys have a try on this question and tell me answer through chat and private message. Let's get started with this question. So basically, notice that a is a positive integer, and we want a squared minus 3a plus 2 is a prime number. So if you guys didn't know about binomials and trinomials, you'll have to learn how to factorize this, which comes in 8th grade, I'm pretty sure. But the key idea between this is think about them as just numbers, alright? It's just negative 2a, or you can basically you split them up and factorize, right? It's distributive property in a nutshell. Well, you can really do the factorizations, and you get a minus 1 times a minus 2. Obviously, if it didn't pop out to you first, you can see that it can split into a squared minus 2a. This can be 2a and 1a plus they're all negative, by the way. So it's a squared minus 2a plus uh negative a plus 2, which is actually negative 1 times a minus 2. From here, this is factorized using the distributive property reversed. Use distributive property once. You get a times a minus 2 plus negative 1 times a minus 2. And then you combine like terms, it just becomes a minus 2 times a minus 1. So you factorize most polynomials, or trinomials, do binomials. So from here, we notice that we want this to be positive and be a prime number, since all prime numbers are positive. So how do we get this? Well, this only happens if and only if one of them is 1, right? Or all of them are, if both of them negative, but that's not possible, since we only want positive integers a. So this only can happen when a minus 2 equals 1, or when a is 3, or a is equal to 2. 2 is not possible, so this only can be 3. Alright? 3 minus 2 is equal to 1, and 3 minus 1 is going to be 2. 1 times 2 is equal to 2. So that is indeed a prime number. I'll see if we can get any more. 4 minus 2 is just 2. 4 minus 1 is just 3. That is not a prime number. And if you continue on, you'll see the same exact pattern. So there's only one possible way, or B. Alright? Now let's move on to example 24. Find a positive integer such that the sum of the positive integer and 72 is a square number, and the sum of the positive integer and 55 is also a square number. I'll let you guys have a try on this question and tell me your answer through chat. All right, guys, let's get started with this question. So basically, how do you approach this? Well, notice that the sum of the positive integer in 72 is a square number, and so is the sum of the positive integer in 55 is also a square number. Note that this is just say the positive integer is just x. It's just going to be x plus 72 and x plus 55. These two are square numbers. Well, this means that this integer must be very small because if it's very small, if it's very small, this is gonna be since the squares are very close, you know that the number itself is actually very small. Why? For example, let's take 4 and 1. 4 is 2 squared, 1 is 1 squared. I'll take 100 squared, which is 10,000. I'm correct. And 101 squared is 10201, if I remember correctly. Yes, the gap between the 100 squared and 101 squared, just 1 by 1, that's 201. But for 4 and 1, 2 squared and 1 squared, the gap is 1 and the difference is only 3. So this gap, which is 17, this number still must be very small. So what squares have the gap? Well, that only can be 81 and 64, which means that x is just 9. Alright? Now let's move on to example 25. For how many integers n is n squared minus 8n plus 15 a prime number? Alright, let's get to trying this question and tell your answer through chat. Alright guys, let's get started with this question. So basically, for how many integers n is n squared minus 8n plus 15 a prime number? Well, we can still factor this again. That's just n minus 7, n minus 3 times n minus 5. Using the same method as we did before. Alright, so now if n must be greater than 3, greater than 3, it could be less than 3, but that means n is less than 5 also, which means that they're negative. So you gotta account for that. Alright? So let's get started. What if n would be greater than 3? That will be n equals 4, and n is gonna be 4 minus 5, it'll be negative 1. This does not work. So if we have to move on one more. 5 can be because we get a negative and a positive that multiplies together to be a negative. We do not want that. We only want positive prime numbers. Now 6. If n equals 6, N minus 3 is going to be 3. So 3 times 1, sometimes it's just going to be 1. That's a prime number. We already had 1. Okay? We have 1. 2. Let's go on to 7. 7 minus 5 is 2. 7 minus 3 is 4. Obviously, it doesn't work, so we do not check those cases now. Let's move on to negative numbers. Let's see what happens. Alright, so what happens when it's negative? Alright, there's a specific range that you must have in order for it to work. Why? Because or else it's gonna be messed up, alright? Since why? Because it's gonna be like the positive, alright? It's gonna be like the positive cases. So n minus 3 could be negative 1, just like before, or n minus 5 could be negative 1. There's many different cases, alright? Let's try n minus 3 first. Negative 1 minus negative 3 is negative 4. And n minus 5 is going to be negative 1 times minus 5, be negative 6, if I'm correct. Yup. So that'll be negative 4 times negative 6. So I'm pretty sure that doesn't work. Alright. Now let's move on to n minus 5 when n is equal to negative 1. That'll be negative 6. Oh, my bad. N is not negative 1, alright? I'm sorry about that. So make sure you don't mess up on the casework or it's going to get failed. So we already got 1, alright? Let's find the other ones, alright? So n minus 5 is negative 1. That's only going to happen when n equals 4. And then 4 minus 3 is 1. 4 minus 5 is negative 1. Yep, it doesn't work. As we already talked about this before. So make sure you don't overcount, alright? n minus 3, if it gives equal to negative 1, if n minus 3 equals negative 1, this is going to mean that n equals 2. And 2 minus 5 is negative 3. We found ourselves another winner. That's going to be negative 3 times negative 1, which is going to be 3, which is a prime number. That's the second one. That's our second. Right? And that's it. That's all we have. It's going to be only 2. Or the answer is just C. Alright? Now let's move on to ratios. Ratios are used to compare two or more numbers. For any two numbers A and B is not equal to 0. The ratio is written as A to B is equal to A divided by B, or A divided by B, or A slash B. There are 16 girls in a class of 30 students. Find the ratio of girls to boys. Express your answer as a common fraction. Tell your answer to the chat in 5 minutes, please. All right, let's get started with this question now. Remember, it says girls to boys, all right? So 16 girls in a class of 30 students. 30 minus 16 is just 14. So the boys' number is just 14, unless there's different genders, but we do not assume that, all right? It's going to be 16 divided by 14, because that's the girls and boys. We're assuming that there's only girls and boys, all right? That's going to be case for every single problem, all right? So don't overcomplicate it. That'll be 8 divided by 7. So the answer to just the question is just D. There's 14 boys, 16 girls. That's just 8 divided by 7. Right? Now let's move on to rates. A rate is the ratio used to compare two numbers of different units. If the second term of the ratio is 1, this rate is called a unit rate. Sam drove 100 miles in 2 hours. What is his rate and the unit rate? Well, his unit rate is just going to be 50 to 1. 100 divided by 2 is just 50. Or the rate is just 100 to 2. This is the unit rate, so we're just going to go with it and say A as our answer. Right? Now let's move on to example 3. Proportions. Proportion is an equation of two ratios. For example, A divided by B is equal to C divided by D. We can find A if we know B, C, D, or we can find no B and divide of C slash D. If refreshments cost $45 for 18 people at the same rate, how much would refreshments cost for 52 people? Let's get to try this question and tell me to do chat. All right, let's get started with this question now. So, all right, so this is just a rate, basically, or a proportion if you want to think about it. So this is in a proportion sense. This is just $45 for 18 people. People. Okay, I'll write 18 people, or P, just extend it, is equal to 52 people on the bottom, same ratio, and how many dollars? Alright, so how do we approach this question? Now, after we do this, that's the first half. Now we got the other half. How do we approach this? Well, notice that you can just do the butterfly multiplication. I think you've learned this in class before, or you'll learn something new today. It's just butterfly multiplication. It looks like a butterfly. Or you can call it cross multiply, right? So a more intuitive way is to see why cross multiplying works. It's because of 32, you can multiply it to both sides. That will cancel out the denominators, 52. And 18 also to the both sides. That will cancel out the 18 in this side and bring 18 over to this side. Alright? And if we do cross multiply, that will be the exact same thing. You'll end up with 45 times 52 is equal to n times 18. Now solving will give you n is equal to $130. Or D. Alright? Now let's move on to 4. A certain paint color is created by mixing 3 parts of red and with every 5 parts of blue. How many gallons of red paint are needed to mix 40 gallons of this color? I'll ask you guys to try this question in terms through chat. Alright, let's get started with this question. Now, a certain paint color is created by mixing 3 parts of red with every 5 parts of blue. Alright? So for 1 gallon, this is just basically saying 3/8, a total of 5 mixtures I meant 8 mixtures. That would be 3 plus 5. Why? Because we have 3 parts of red and then 5 parts of blue. The fraction in a gallon, that will not be 3/5. It will be 3/8 because you still have to include the 3 parts of red itself. So the fractions are going to be 3 divided by 3 plus 5 and 5 divided by 3 plus 5. Or 5/8 and 3/8. Right? Now we want to see how many gallons of red paint are needed to mix 40 gallons of this color. Well, we know that for 1 gallon, you only need 3/8 of the gallon. 3/8 of red paint. Now, we want 40 of these. Well, we just multiply 3/8 by 40. And you just we're left with 15 as your answer. It's just simple ratio and rates and proportions. These are all the questions basically. So it's just B. Alright. Now let's move on to the important properties that you need to know. The first property, the first term of ratio can be any number. The second term can also be any number except 0. Pretty obvious. Why? Because we can't divide by 0. Now let's move on to property 2. If the two terms are multiplied by the same number d, the ratio does not change. Easy to see why. Remember, it's just a fraction. So it's just a times d divided by b times d, which is just equal to a divided by b. These just cancel out. Property 3. If the two terms are divided by the same number c is not equal to 0, the ratio does not change. Alright? Same exact reason why. A divided by c divided by b divided by c is obviously the same, since you can easily make it into fractions. This just simplifies to a divided by b, which is the exact same proportion or ratio. Property 4, if the total number of mixed parts, the total number of parts is m equals a plus b, and a to b is equal to a to b, then the fractional part of a is a divided by a plus b, and b is equal to b divided by a plus b. And the fractional part of a is just a equals a divided by a plus b times n, m and b. All right, let's get started with this question. So, in a group of 72 students, if the ratio of boys to girls is 5 to 3, how many boys are in the group? Well, notice that boys have to be 5 and girls have to be 3, all right? For every 5 boys, there are going to be 3 girls. So, if we think about adding up all of it, the total will be 8 in this case, right? 8 parts, okay? We have 5 parts, it's going to be boys, and 3 parts is going to be girls. Now, we want to get 8 to 72. That's the whole point of ratios and rates. Well, that's only by multiplying by 9. You multiply by 9 for each of these, 5 and 3, we get 45 and 27. This adds up to be 72 in D. So this is our ratio. Now we want to find how many boys are in the group. That will be just 45 or C. Alright? Now let's move on to example 6. Keith bought paper for making origami figure. He bought 2 packages of orange paper, 3 packages of yellow paper, and 5 packages of blue paper. What fraction of the papers was blue? All together in the time this question and tell me your answer through chat. Let's get started with this question. So, start with example 6. He bought paper for making an origami figure. He bought 2 packages of orange, 3 packages of yellow, and 5 packages of blue. This is a basic question, but with more numbers now. Not instead of 2, we have 3 now. Right? So 2 parts is going to be orange, 3 parts is going to be yellow, and 5 parts is going to be blue. Total number of parts is going to be 10. Right? 2 of them will be orange, so that's 2/10 of it is going to be orange. Yellow is going to be 3/10. And blue is going to be 5/10, or 1/2. Right? Now we want to find what fraction of the papers is blue. We notice that this is just going to be 5/10 or 1/2. So the answer is just E. Alright, now let's move on to example 7. Keith bought 10 packages of paper to make origami figure, and same exact ratio. Orange paper is 2, yellow paper is 3, and blue paper is 5. How many packages of blue paper did he buy? 1, 5, 3, 7, or 9? Let's go to try this question and tell me your answer through chat. Alright, for this question is basically similar to example 6, alright? But it's basically when we multiply by 10, alright? Since we know that from the example 6, the last answer is just gonna be 1/2. That's gonna be 5 parts out of 10 parts. This is gonna be 1/2 times 10 or 5 in total, or B as our answer. Alright? Now let's move on to example 8. Michael types 250 words in 20 minutes. How many hours will it take to type him for it take him to type a 7,500 word paper? Unless you guys want to try this question, in 10 minutes in chat. Alright guys, let's get started with this question. Michael types 250 words in 20 minutes. How many hours will it take to type a 7,500 word paper? Let's first convert it into hours, alright? Not looking at the problem, think about minutes and try to get a 7,500 word paper and then realize that you solved it only for minutes and you can't find the answer there, so you just skip it, which is a lost problem, lost point. Alright? First, let's convert it to an hour, right? 20 times 3 is 60. 60 minutes is 1 hour. So we multiply 250 words also by 3 to account for that. That would be 750 words per 60 minutes. Per 60 minutes. Or hour. Now, 750 words, we want a 7,500 word paper. So you get from here into a 7,500 divided by 750, or 10 hours worth of typing in order to get this 7,500 word paper. Alright? Since we want to type in total 7,500 words, you only can type 750 words per hour. That would be 7,500 divided by 750, or 10 hours that are taken for him to type. Right? So the answer to this question is just A. Right? So that's it for today's class. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you good luck on the AMC8, and I'll see you next week. Bye!